Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and I want to thank AST for inviting me to this panel, to this conference. I am not an academic like some of my peers on this panel. I am an American Muslim advocate and activist who has been watching with alarm, I think, in the last 6, 7 years, the growing influence of the Turkish government over American Muslim organizations and leaders. And that is what I want to talk about today, because that is something that I have observed and I can talk about. So I want to, but first, kind of lay the foundation of the idea of Erdogan in the American Muslim psyche, but also I think on a global scale. I think it's important to understand why there has been so much success in terms of exerting influence over American Muslim organizations and leaders. And it's because when Erdogan first emerged on the international scene, I mean, that's really when he became known in American Muslim circles. He very quickly took on kind of a mythology, and the narrative around him was that he was like this strong Muslim leader in a absolute desert of Muslim leadership, but not just a Muslim leader, but an Islamic leader, that he was a resurrector of Islam in Turkey. He was seen as somebody who was very firm against Israel, where Arab leadership was more compliant in some ways. And so he kind of reached a little bit of a mythical status, I would say, amongst in the global Muslim psyche and certainly amongst American Muslims. And so when the tide began to change in terms of his governance, I don't think many of our communities here were quite aware of that. And as I said, he really was hailed as somebody who was almost, if the global Muslim community could have selected a caliph, he might have been it at the time. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my first awareness of the reach of the Turkish government, and that happened in 2016. This was a few months after the failed coup, and I was attending, as I have pretty much my entire life, the ISNA annual ISNA conference, which is the Islamic Society of North America. It, I would say, is the largest Muslim society in North America. And it's something that I and my family, we have been constituents of. We have attended the gathering since I was a child. Well, when I attended that winter or that late fall in 2016, I thought it was really odd that the stage was being given at one point to the foreign minister of Turkey. And then as we were let out of that huge auditorium full of, I think, tens of thousands of attendees, outside there were just lines and lines and lines of tables filled with packets that were given out to everybody, had books that were printed, very thick, full of color pages, books that were printed that talked about the coup, basically. It was pure propaganda that basically was a way for the government to reach all the attendees of ISNA and say, well, look, this is the narrative of the coup as far as we're concerned. Erdogan is the upholder of the rule of law and democracy, and this is how we were able to curtail this coup, thankfully. So that's when I started, I was pretty alarmed at that. And I think I actually tweeted on social media, like, what is happening? I've never seen anything like this take place at a domestic conference. But again, as this is happening, you know, their audience is the average American Muslim who might not be very aware of what's happening politically in other parts of the world, and certainly not what's happening on the human rights front and democracy in Turkey. Now, since then, I think there has been a much more concerted effort to continue to groom Muslim leaders and organizations and even communities in themselves. About a year ago, Ahmet Yayla wrote a report that you can find it publicly. It's called Erdogan's Long Arm in the U.S., and I highly encourage folks to take a look at it. It's nearly 200 pages of documentation of how this government has managed to influence and groom American Muslim organizations. And there is nearly no national American Muslim organization that has not been touched. MAS, which is the Muslim American Society, ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America, the Islamic Society of North America, CARE, which is the Council of American Islamic Relations, which is the only real and most longstanding Muslim American civil rights organization that we have. And also the USCMO, which is the U.S. Council on Muslim Organizations, an umbrella organization that I think has a membership of 50 plus Muslim organizations. They have all become somehow intertwined and entrenched with the Turkish government. But they are domestic American organizations, and they become platforms really to host delegates. They have themselves become guests of the Turkish government. Some of the ways that these organizations and individuals and communities have been groomed is that they have been invited on sponsored tourism trips to Turkey, to international conferences held in Turkey. They are getting invitations to very high level state events, so sitting at tables with the heads of state, again, as leaders of American domestic organizations and well outside of their mandate. There has also been reporting that many of these organizations are getting funding in some way, which is highly problematic, I think, on an ethical and legal front. And then there's the establishment of religious institutions. Not far from where I live, this incredible mosque was built by the Turkish government and unveiled just a couple of years ago. I think it was a $120 million project. It's beautiful. It's in the middle of a suburban Maryland community, the Diyanet Center. And beyond that, the Turkish government has apparently taken over many different religious establishments and organizations around the country, and also are building new ones. So they are in the community in this way as well. A couple of examples that I want to talk about specifically that that I was frankly shocked at in terms of the way that the Turkish government has been welcomed and kind of almost led by hand into our communities is are three different folks I'm going to mention by name. First is Suhaib Webb, who is a very, very well-known, highly prominent cleric in the United States. He was at a conference a few years ago, and he introduced the daughter of President Erdogan to speak that night. And he said explicitly, "I'm very honored to introduce her." And he also thanked President Erdogan for his concern for justice and tolerance. Someone else whose video I saw a couple of years ago, Tahira Ahmed, and these are people that I've known for many years. And Tahira Ahmed is a very prominent, well-known, and well-respected Muslim chaplain. She apparently was on a state-sponsored trip. I believe it was a tourism trip, and she sat down for I think it was like a 2-hour interview with somebody else from the government, somebody from the Turkish government, in which it was basically a propaganda video about, and she was really, it almost seemed like a bit of a hostage situation. She seemed kind of pressured to make really positive and supportive statements about the Turkish government, and she did. She even went as far as to say that President Erdogan was a lion of Islam. So the audience for, the audience for a video like that is not Turkey, it's American Muslims. It's people who look up to leaders like Suhaib Webb and Tahira Ahmed and get their signals from them. I think one of the most concerning figures who seems to be propping up this government repeatedly is the National Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. Again, it's an American Muslim domestic civil rights organization. And his name is Mr. Nihad Awad. He has made repeated trips to Turkey. He has tweeted about meeting with President Erdogan multiple times. He has praised democracy and the rule of law under Erdogan. And it is beyond my imagination and understanding why someone in his position, who heads a civil rights organization in the United States, is engaged in this kind of propaganda on behalf of a government that has been reported to be cracking down on human rights and democracy for years now. And also, again, it's well outside his mandate. Why are you speaking on behalf of a foreign government? You are the executive director of an American Muslim organization. No. So what is kind of like the impact of this, what this influence has had here, I would say is, for the most part, you see almost dead silence from the American Muslim community on human rights violations and crackdown on the rule of law and democracy in Turkey. You never hear it. You just don't hear it. It does not make news in the American Muslim community. You have the blacklisting of critics like Inez Cantor, who just this, I believe it was the summer prior to last, was holding a series. He's an NBA player, for those who don't know. He's holding a series of basketball camps for young people around the country. And in a number of different places where mosques were sponsoring these basketball camps for young Muslims, and other kids in the community, they were pressured by the Turkish consulate and by Turkish officials to cancel these camps, and they did get them successfully canceled in a number of places. So, I mean, the extent that the Turkish government would go to cancel basketball camps for young Americans because they are being led by somebody who's not there in any capacity to talk about politics, but it's only there to teach young kids some basketball, I think is kind of astounding. There's also obviously the vast messaging and reach that all the different religious organizations are being established in different communities, what they're able to do that way. But I think, the ultimate question is like, why so much effort in doing this? And I think at the end of the day, obviously it's because the President Erdogan is making the calculation that he needs American Muslims on his side politically, in order to carry political water for him in the United States. And he's been successful in doing that. For example, just earlier this year, the U.S. CMO, the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, again, a very large umbrella group of domestic Muslim organizations, issued a statement about the Armenian genocide in which they opposed the determination of the genocide as a genocide. I was, again, frankly, kind of shocked that, I don't see the place of an organization like this to make statements on issues like that. But clearly it was an attempt to influence this discussion, more broadly influence elected leadership on this issue. Most recently, I would say the effort has been in a very strange, convoluted way. So about a month before the U.S. presidential election that just took place, there was suddenly a boycott against an organization called Emerge. And Emerge is one of the more prominent Muslim organizations that does political organizing, and so as this organization is trying to rally American Muslims to take part, to register to vote, to take part in this election, it's a very important election in our lifetimes, given what we have seen from this administration in the last few years. Suddenly there's a call from within the Muslim community to boycott Emerge because of alleged connections between a number of board members and some pro-Israel Americans and American organizations. So this is not even based on, let's say, an official connection between Mgage and any of these organizations, but just that a couple of board members had connections to organizations that were considered Zionist organizations. And I was really horrified because I said, this is not the time. I mean, like, wait till after the election if you're gonna raise this criticism against Emerge, but this is not the time to do it. We need all hands on deck for this election. Well, Nafis Ahmed, who is an incredible investigative journalist, did a number of articles around that time trying to figure out where this is coming from, and traced this boycott back to an American Palestinian professor who now is has actually long been based in Turkey now, who apparently has been behind like this effort to boycott the one organization that is trying to rally American Muslims to go and vote against Trump. And of course, this in many ways goes to serve President Erdogan, because the American administration under Trump really has been completely silent on any of human rights violations by Erdogan. And he's been able to really just operate with complete complicity on the part of the American administration. So I would say the only saving grace, sadly, and ironically, is that American Muslims basically just don't really have the kind of political influence that the Turkish government might hope we have at this point. We really cannot sway elections, I would say. And I'm grateful that we don't have that power right now, given some of the attempts at manipulating that power. But I will say it doesn't mean that there aren't young people in this country being groomed by foreign governments or by foreign influences to then take leadership positions, right? Like I don't know what the long game here is, but it's highly problematic to me that American Muslim organizations and leaders are not seeing the danger in this and are not seeing the threat. They have either deliberately or inadvertently become vehicles for foreign propaganda. And I do want to say this. Look, I am an equal opportunity opponent of the interference or influence of any government, domestic or foreign, on any domestic organization. It just shouldn't ever happen. I'm not singling out Turkey. Of course, it's more problematic, and the implications are more dire when the government that's exerting that kind of influence is already engaged in the systematic crackdown on human rights and democracy. But I would hold firm on this for any government, including the American government, should have no influence on American nonprofits and American Muslim leadership. So, my real concern is that these organizations are vital to the institutional life of American Muslims. There is no replacement for them. And again, I want to stress that by allowing this kind of influence to take place, they really are compromising the security and future of the organizations themselves and our communities. And that's because aligning with a foreign government is never a good idea. The political winds can shift at any time, and that would leave them open to leave them vulnerable to charges of guilt by association if relationships were to change on an international level. There's no place for the involvement of government with these kinds of institutions. So I would just say that this is an issue that, and I also say this as somebody who continues to support these organizations because our community needs these organizations. I want these organizations to be protected, and I want the leaders who have come out and just been silent on this, or actually praised the Turkish government for their commitment to human rights and democracy, which is laughable, to really take a good look at the kind of message they're giving and the hypocrisy of it, considering the kind of demands that we want to make on the American government in terms of our human rights and civil rights in this country. So I'm just going to wrap up there. I don't know if I'm over my time or not, and I apologize if I am.